Hi again. I want to talk to you today about the biblical origins of the Middle East. I'm going to point out today how the Middle East was basically formed in its different segments and how the enemies of the Israelites were formed. And we're going to look at Israel and Jacob and the history of Jacob a little bit and the original promise to Israel. Remember, Jacob is Israel. So we have to start off with Abraham's son, Ishmael. So in Genesis chapter 16, we see in verse 1, Sarah, Abraham's wife, bore him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, "Behold, now the Lord has restrained me from bearing. I pray you, go into my maid, so that I may obtain children by her." And Abraham hearkened unto the voice of Sarai his wife. And Sarai, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abraham, "My wrong be upon you. I have given my maid into your bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and you." But Abram said to Sarah, "Behold, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as it pleases you." And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain on the way to Shur. And he said to Hagar, Sarah's maid, "Whence camest thou, and where are you going?" And she said, "I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress, and submit yourself under her hands." And the angel of the Lord said unto her, "I will multiply your seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. And he will be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." And then in verse 16, Abram was 86 years old. That's 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abraham. So the first son of Abraham was Ishmael. And it was basically promised to Hagar that Ishmael would become a great nation. In chapter 17, verse 1, it says, "And when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be you perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly." And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, Abraham, and you shall be a father of many nations." Not just one nation, not just Ishmael. In other words, there's going to be other nations that come out of you. And then in verse 5, "Neither shall your name any more be called Abram, but you shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations I have made you. And I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations," plural, nations of you, "and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you." This isn't the old covenant of Moses. This is the covenant between God and Abraham. It says, "I will establish my covenant between me and you, Abraham, and your seed after you, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you, and to your seed after you. And I will give to you, and to your seed after you, the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." Now, it says here that I will give you, and to your seed after you, the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession. Now, Abraham's seed ended up to be Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob became Israel. And Israel is who God gave Canaan to. God gave Canaan to Israel for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abraham, You shall keep my covenant, therefore, and your seed after you in their generations. Now, this is Abraham he's talking to. This isn't Israel. This is before Jacob, before Isaac. This is Abraham. You shall keep my covenant and your seed after you. This is the covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your seed after you. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. So this was the covenant of circumcision that was between God and Abraham. This was not the old covenant. It had nothing to do with the law. The law was not given now. The law was given many, many years later to Moses. But this is the covenant of circumcision. And it was given to Abraham, and it included Ishmael and Isaac. Later on, the sons of Abraham were to be circumcised, because this was between God and Abraham. And Abraham's sons included Ishmael and Isaac. That's why circumcision is for both Jews and the Ishmaelites. They all believe in circumcision. And it says in verse 11, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you, between God and Abraham. So the circumcision was the covenant between God and Abraham. And then down in verse 15 here, it says, and God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and give you a son also of her. Of course, that's going to be Isaac. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. And that would be the Israelites and the descendants of Esau. Because remember, Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. So then verse 17, then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, O that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son indeed, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. So the covenant is going to extend to Isaac. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. So Ishmael also had 12 princes come out of. There were 12 sons of Jacob, while Ishmael also had 12 princes that he begot. And he was made into a great nation. Ishmael was made into a great nation. And those were the nations surrounding Israel. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac. So Isaac is the one who God's going to establish this covenant with, which Sarah shall bear unto you at this set time in the next year. So that was the covenant of Abraham, between Abraham and God. And Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh. And Ishmael was 13 years old. And then in chapter 21, verse 1, it says, And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son which was born to him, the son Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And then in verse 8, the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said to Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. In other words, Abraham loved both Isaac and Ishmael. And God said to Abraham, Let it not be grievous in your sight because of the lad and because of your bondwoman. In all that Sarah has said unto you, hearkened unto her voice, for in Isaac shall your seed be called. So in Isaac, the line of Abraham would continue unto the seed of the woman, which bring forth the Messiah. And also the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is your seed. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down over against him a good way off, for she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in your hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, that's Ishmael, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. And then in chapter 25, verse 1, it says, Then Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Now this is Abraham still. And she bore him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. Now these sons would later become enemies of the Israelites, along with the Ishmaelites and the sons of Esau. We'll see that in a minute. But here we see the Midianites. This is the start of the Midianites, was from Abraham. Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and the Midianites came from Abraham. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Ashurim and Letushim and Leumim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah and Epher and Hanok and Abida and Eldah, all these were the children of Keturah. Now all these children that Abraham fathered would become nations also. And Abraham gave all he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he lived eastward unto the east country. And then when Abraham died at a good old age and full of years, and was gathered to his people, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave at Machpelah in the field of Ephron. And then verse 11, it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac. And then in verse 12, these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bore unto Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations. Firstborn of Ishmael was Nebajoth and Kedar and Abdeel and Mibsam and Mishma and Duma and Massa. And all these names here, these sons of Ishmael, these were their names by their towns. In other words, each of these would become a nation. And by their castles, 12 princes, just as God had promised that Ishmael would have 12 princes, according to their nations. So the 12 princes each had their own nation. And these became the nations that were surrounding Israel. And then in verse 20, Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife. And after he took Rebekah, he had Jacob and Esau. Rebekah, his wife, conceived, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 nations. And 2 manner of people shall be separated from your bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So Esau was going to serve Jacob. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, there were twins in her womb. The first came out all red, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother, who took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, because he was a hunter. Esau was a cunning hunter. And Rebekah loved Jacob. And then we see the story of how Jacob got Esau to sell him his birthright. And Jacob basically bought Esau's birthright as the firstborn with bread and a pottage of lentils. In chapter 27, And it came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said, My son, I am old and I know not the day of my death. Now go and hunt with your quiver and bow and make me some savory meat and bring it to me that I may eat and that my soul may bless you before I die. So here Isaac wants to bless Esau, his eldest. And then in verse 5, we see how Rebekah found out about this and how Esau went to hunt for the venison and to bring it in. And Rebekah basically set it up so that Jacob got the blessing instead of Esau. And Jacob basically lied to his father. In verse 19, Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. Well, this was Jacob, it wasn't Esau. And I have done according as you have said, and sit and eat my venison, that your soul may bless me. So he wants to receive the blessing. Isaac receives the blessing in verse 28. Therefore God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brethren. So he's telling Jacob unknowingly, he's giving Jacob the blessing that was supposed to be for Esau. He tells Jacob, be Lord over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. So that would include Esau. Esau would have to bow down to Jacob. Cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be he that blesses you. So this is the blessing that was given to Abraham originally in Genesis. And Isaac is passing it on to Jacob. And so it came to pass, as soon as Isaac had made an end of the blessing Jacob, that Jacob had scarce gone from the presence of his father, then Esau, his brother, came in from his hunting. And in verse 37, Isaac tells Esau, I've already made Jacob your Lord, and all his brethren I have given to him for servants, and I have sustained him. And what will I do now for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, have you not but one blessing for me? Bless me even also. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling shall be in the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. And by your sword you will live, and you shall serve your brother. Your brother is Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So here Esau is told he will serve his brother. And it shall come to pass that when you shall have dominion, that you shall break his yoke off your neck. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing. So here's the biggie here. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherein his father had blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. So Esau was planning to slay his brother Jacob. And Rebekah heard about this. And Rebekah, of course, is the one who got Jacob to receive the blessing. And so these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah. And she sent and called for Jacob, her younger son, and said, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself, proposing to kill you. Therefore, my son, arise and flee to Laban your brother in Haran. So that's what ends up happening in chapter 28. And when he tells his father that Isaac that he's leaving, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise and go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, my mother's father, and take you a wife from the daughters of Laban, my mother's brother. And God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be a multitude of people, and give you the blessing of Abraham. So here Jacob received the blessing of Abraham that was passed on to Isaac. Isaac passed it on to Jacob, and give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed after you. That would be the 12 sons of Jacob. That'd be Israel. That's all of Israel. That you may inherit the land wherein you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. So who is going to inherit the land? Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. And so Isaac sent Jacob away, and he fled his brother Esau, because Esau was going to kill him. Then went Esau unto Ishmael. That was Abraham's other son, Isaac's brother, Ishmael, his half-brother. Esau went unto Isaac's half-brother Ishmael, and he took wives from Ishmael, Abraham's son. So here we see that Esau ended up mingling with the Ishmaelites. The blood of Esau and the Ishmaelites was mingled because Esau himself took a wife from the Ishmaelites. And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went to Haran. When he's fleeing now, he's fleeing from Esau, his brother. This is where God appears to him. He lighted on a certain place and tarried there all night because the sun was set. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set upon the earth. And this is the Jacob's ladder story. And the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of heaven ascended and descended on it. And notice that heaven is up. It's above. Heaven is above. And there was a ladder that went up to it, just reinforcing the idea that heaven is above the firmament. The firmament is heaven, and God's temple is above the firmament. And behold, the Lord stood above it. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? The top of it reached to heaven, and the Lord stood above it. Well, the heaven is the firmament. The top reached to the firmament. What is the firmament? God called the firmament heaven. That's what God called the firmament. The top of the ladder that Jacob saw in his dream reached to heaven. And the angels were ascending and descending from the firmament, from above the firmament down onto the earth. And behold, the Lord stood above it. That's where God's temple is. He was above the firmament. And he said, I am the Lord God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac, and the land wherein you lie, I will give it to you and to your seed. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and shall spread about to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And that's true, because Jesus Christ came from the tribe of Judah, which is one of Jacob's sons. And Jesus Christ, of course, is the seed of the woman that blessed all the families of the earth. Jesus took the sins of the whole world, so whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. So in Jacob, and in your seed, what is his seed? One of his seeds is his son Judah. From the tribe of Judah, from his descendants came Jesus Christ. And from thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. In other words, here we know that the seed of the woman that was told to Satan was going to crush his head in the Garden of Eden, that seed was going to be from Jacob, from Israel. And he says, behold, I am with you and will keep you in all places where you go and will bring you again to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you of. And Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And then verse 19, he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was called Luz at first. Then in verse 20, Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. So this is a conditional statement here, a conditional prayer. This is a covenant Jacob, whose name will be changed to Israel, is making with God. And he says, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou hast given me, I will surely give you a tenth. That's where the tithe originated from. Because remember, this is Jacob, whose name would be changed to Israel, and Israel received the covenant. And so Jacob here is setting the tithe into motion. No, it was not in place before this. Abraham once gave a tenth of all his spoils of war to Melchizedek, but that was not a tithe, and the Bible tells us that was not a tithe. But here we see the origins of the tithe. Is Jacob says that if God will bless him and will bless the way he goes and give him raiment and food, then he would give a tenth to God. So this conditional statement is what caused God to put the tithe in the law. This is something he says, I will do. I will surely give you a tenth. And sure enough, he did. The tithe was put into place by God. God said, okay, I'll take you up on that. And he put it in the old covenant. Now, if we move on to chapter 32, we see Jacob heading back to his father's land. He had served Laban and gotten his wives, Leah and Rachel. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, into the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Now, this is not Jacob fleeing from Esau. This is Jacob coming back to his father's house, to the land that Esau is still in. And he commanded them, saying, thus shall you speak to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed with him until now. And he asked that he would find grace in Esau's sight when he returns home. And the messengers returned to Jacob and said, we came to your brother Esau, and also he comes to meet you, and 400 men with him. And Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Because remember, why did Jacob flee from his father's house to begin with? Because Esau was going to kill him when Isaac died. So, and Jacob found out about it. That's why he left. He fled Esau, his brother, back then at that time. And that's when he saw the stairway, the ladder coming down from heaven. That's when he had that dream, is when he was fleeing his brother Esau. But here he's coming back to his father's house. This is chapter 32. This is a while later, after he served Laban. And Jacob was greatly distressed. He was like, oh no, Esau's going to kill me. Even after all these years, he's still mad and he's going to kill me. Then Jacob prayed in verse 9. Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which said to me, return unto your country and to your kindred, and I will deal well with you. God told Jacob to return to his country and to his kindred, and he would deal well with them. Go back to chapter 31, we see why Jacob left. It says, the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, and then he goes on to say, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you vowed a vow to me. What was that vow? That was the vow that if God provided for him and brought him back safely to his father's house, that he would give 1/10 of everything he had. So this is the God of Bethel. This is God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he says, now arise and get you out of this land and return unto the land of your kindred. So here God is telling Jacob to go back to the land where Esau is, the land of his kindred. So then Jacob rose up and set his sons and wives upon camels, and they set off to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. And that's what brings us to chapter 32, where Jacob was greatly distressed, and he divided his people into 2 bands. And when he prayed, he said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which said to me, return unto your country and to your kindred, and I will deal well with you. Then look what Jacob prays. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and smite me, kill me, and the mother with the children. And you said, I will surely do you good, and make your seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. And then he lodged there at that same night. And he sent a bunch of gifts forward to his brother to meet him with gifts before his brother got to him. So when he sent forth these gifts to meet his brother, he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. So Jacob was wrestling with a being. This is man here is a being. Wrestled with, some translations say angel, but it says he wrestled with someone. Now, he had just asked God for help and for favor. And God had told him to return to his father's house. So he was being obedient by returning to his father's house. And he'd asked God for help with his brother Esau. And this being wrestled with him when Jacob was left alone. Now, obviously, any kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. So this being was not from God. This was not an angel of God that he was wrestling. Because in verse 25, when he saw that he prevailed not against him, in other words, this angel was not able to prevail against Jacob, a man. He wasn't able to prevail against a man. This being touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, and as he wrestled with him. Now that's an injury. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus came to give life, and that more abundantly. When Jesus' ministry on the earth happened, he was doing good. He was healing those who were oppressed by the devil. The devil was causing the sicknesses and the injuries, and it was God who was healing them. Same thing right here. This being touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, and it was out of joint as he wrestled with him. So he injured Jacob. And this being said, let me go, for the day breaks. And he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So Jacob says, I want you to bless me. And Jacob doesn't know who he's wrestling. As far as he knows, it could be an angel of God. As far as he knows, it could be God himself. He doesn't know what we know now. Back then, they didn't know. They blamed everything on God, basically, back in those days, in the Old Testament days. And so Jacob asked this being for a blessing. And in verse 27, he said unto him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince, you have power with God and with men and have prevailed. Now, this being, first of all, he says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. So he's saying, I'm changing your name to Israel. Okay, isn't that interesting? Because it's later on when God tells me your name is Jacob, and now it is Israel. So this being is not God. And we'll see that in a minute. For as a prince, you have power with God and with men and have prevailed. Now, he would not prevail if he was wrestling God or one of God's angels. He would not prevail against God. Okay, so this being is not from God, and it's not God. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray, what is your name? And he said, why do you ask my name? In other words, he's not going to tell him his name. The New Testament tells us that the devil appears as an angel of light. Here's a perfect example. Why? I'm not going to tell you my name, he says. And he blessed him there. Now people say, well, how come he blessed him? Satan wouldn't bless a man. No, bless here is to admit defeat. He admitted defeat to him there. In other words, this being understood that he was beaten in this wrestling match by Jacob. And then Jacob, in his ignorance, he calls the name of the place Peniel, and he says, for I've seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So see, to him, anything supernatural is God to Jacob. Because Jacob doesn't know any better. He doesn't know what we know from the New Testament. He doesn't know all the truths we know about God, that Jesus did good and healed, and he's the exact representation of the Father. The Father doesn't put sickness on people. He doesn't put injury on people. He doesn't oppose people when they pray to him for help. Jacob had just gotten through praying to God for help, and this being wrestles with him and opposes him. This being is opposing him right after he just asked God for help. That's unprecedented in the Bible. When you ask God for help, God gave you the help. If there was an opposition, it was the devil. So here we see that just as plain as day that this being is not God, but Jacob thinks it is. So he called the place the name Peniel, for I've seen God face to face. No, he hasn't. He didn't see God face to face. He thought he saw God face to face. The Bible correctly quotes him. The Bible correctly quotes what Jacob said. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face. That's what Jacob's thought. I've seen God face to face and my life is preserved. Well, we know that's not true. No one can see God's face and live. Moses couldn't look upon God's face. Elijah couldn't look upon God's face. There's no way Jacob could have looked upon God's face and lived. So obviously this was not God, and Jacob thought that he had seen God. But you see here that this being said, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. Now he's trying to change his name from Jacob to Israel here, but he doesn't have the authority to do it. 3 chapters later, chapter 35, we see God said to Jacob, arise and go up to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar unto God that appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother. In other words, this is not the God that wrestled with you. Why wouldn't he have mentioned that he was the God who wrestled with him? No, he didn't say that. He is the God that appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. That was the ladder that reached up to heaven when God said, I will bless you. That's what he's referring to here. So he's referring to that instance. And so he says in verse 3, let us arise and go to Bethel, and I will make an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and was with me in the way which I went. So Jacob came to Luz, which is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel. He and all the people that were with him, and he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. That's when he was fleeing from his brother and he saw the ladder that went to heaven. This is not when he wrestled with the being, the angel. It was the devil or one of his demons. No, God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. And that's what Bethel is about. Bethel is where he saw the ladder going up to heaven. And then verse 9, God appeared to Jacob again when he came out of Paddan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. Hold on a second. When that being wrestled with Jacob, he said, your name will no longer be Jacob, it will be Israel. Here God is telling him your name is Jacob. In other words, that being was not telling him the truth. That being was telling something he knew was going to happen. That being that he wrestled with knew that his name was going to get changed to Jacob. Remember, Satan had access to God's throne. He appeared before God with the angels in the book of Job. He had access to God's throne. He knew a lot of the things that were happening that God was going to do. And here God says, your name is Jacob. It's not Israel, it's Jacob. So this being lied to him, said when he said, your name is now Israel. It's no longer Jacob. No, he was wrong. That was not true because he says, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called anymore Jacob. Now he's changing his name. But Israel shall be your name. And he called his name Israel. This is after he returned to his father's house. This is long after he wrestled with this angel. And he said, your name is Jacob. Now it will be Israel. So that being that he wrestled with, that was not God. And it was not one of God's angels. And God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of you, and kings shall come out of your loins. This is the blessing given to Abraham, is coming to Jacob. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to you I will give it, and to your seed after you will I give the land. So the Israelites are the ones who the land of the promised land of Israel was given to. The land of Canaan and the whole land that Israel took, that was given to them by God. So that kind of tells you where the opposition of Israel came from and where Israel originally came from. Israel actually is Jacob. Jacob's sons are Israel. That's who Israel is. And the Ishmaelites and the Edomites and the Midianites, all those came from the children of Ishmael and Edom, which is Esau. Esau and Ishmael and Abraham's other sons. Remember, Abraham had all those other sons. And all those other sons, they all became nations too. The opponents they had when they were in their land were from Abraham's sons. And those people that were from Abraham's loins, those people that were Abraham's descendants, they were circumcised because the covenant was made with Abraham. And you can see that all the Muslim countries, they believe in circumcision. Why is that? Because they are children of Abraham. Abraham's sons included the Ishmaelites and the Edomites, and that's where the Muslims get their descendancy from. But this is kind of a general outline of the Middle East and the biblical perspective of how the Middle East became what it is. So thanks for watching.